The 11th of January 2022. Welcome to Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. That was a very good news show that we just enjoyed. I really enjoyed that, and well done, guys. That was an excellent first episode. It can only get better from here, as they say. The show's called Get On Up, in case you didn't realize, because it's like a morning show, right? So get on up. It's just after 9 here on the West Coast. I'm in Los Angeles, California, and Carla's producing from London, England. It's the British invasion on this Tuesday morning. And we've got lots to talk about. You're welcome to get in touch in the usual way. You can send your message via your Echo Show device. Just say the wake-up word, followed by say, and then your message. You can also do the chat facility at backchannel.tv. Just open that up on your browser, on your phone, on your laptop, wherever. Or you can, or you are also welcome to watch us on YouTube, where we stream live. So lots on the show today. We're going to discuss voting rights. President Biden's biggest headache could be. He plans to deliver a hard-hitting speech in Atlanta on voting rights later today. Also, a priority for Joe Biden is getting America to trust good science. We'll explain more about that later. Also, Maya Angelou is the first black woman to ever grace the quarter as part of the U.S. Mint's American Women's Quarters program. So we're going to look at the incredible lives of the women that will be featured on those new coins. And finally, an American man has become the first to receive a pig heart transplant. That's the only downside to this. Is now he eats from a trough and snorts his way through lunch. But he's very good at finding truffles, apparently. So that'll be his new job. We'll take a look at some other firsts in American history. I do have some weird interests in the artificial heart. Here's some trivia for you. The guy who was like my mentor in show business is a guy called Paul Winchell, who's an American voice actor who was the voice of Tigger, the original voice of Tigger in Winnie the Pooh. He also invented the artificial heart. He invented it. The guy who was Tigger invented the artificial heart. And he actually sold the patent to a university in the 1970s. I think they used a cow's heart back then. It didn't work, but it's exactly the same technology that they are using now, putting the pig heart into this guy at the University of Maryland. So, very interesting. It's all very interesting. So, lots to talk about today. And hopefully you can be part of the show as well. Michael's already joined us from Virginia. Good morning, Michael. We're going to jump onto the morning papers, see what's happening, around the world. Actually, more around the country, actually. Screw the world. We've got the country to deal with, We're going to go to Atlanta first for the Atlanta Mirror. Unvaccinated top PA hospitalizations. Pennsylvania hospitals say the vast majority of hospitalized coronavirus patients are still unvaccinated. As high as 90% at some hospitals. Even more vaccinated people are also getting infected amid the Omicron/Delta surge. Everyone's going to get this. Everyone is going to get this. This is where it turns from a pandemic into an epidemic. But the case for it getting weaker as everybody gets it is a good one. The CDC isn't talking about it yet. Well, they're just saying stuff in a random order now, I don't know if you happened to see Dr. Fauci today on the stand giving evidence where he basically turned to Rand Paul, the senator who has an anti-Fauci campaign, is trying to raise money on his own website, claiming Fauci is a fraud. Fire Fauci. Fauci dealt with it head-on today. Had printouts of Rand Paul's website where he's raising money to fire Fauci. Showed them. Said, look at this. This is Rand Paul's website. And Rand Paul's sitting right there. And then Fauci talked about the guy that was arrested in Washington last week with an AK-47 machine gun in his trunk, who was on his way to kill Fauci. The whole thing is like a disaster movie. Republican senators have turned Fauci into the enemy when the guy has devoted his life to saving people's lives. And yet, You have idiots like Rand Paul who cared nothing but for their own political success, politicizing the coronavirus to make money out of Dr. Fauci. It's so offensive. And Fauci had enough today. Fauci's like 80 years of age. He's like, I've had enough. Fire me if you want. Right? This is where it's at now. This is the modern civil warfare I've been talking about. You know, it's not muskets anymore. It's misinformation. That's the modern civil warfare. A woman sentenced for homicide by vehicle, also on the front of the Atlanta Mirror this morning. They say it was an emotional morning in Clearfield County Court as an Atlanta woman was sentenced to 3 to 6 months in county jail for an accident that ended the life of her 5-year-old son. She pleaded guilty by homicide by vehicle, to an accident. She was traveling between 77 and 84 miles per hour, the criminal complaint states. She failed to negotiate a curb in the Rolling Stone Road. The vehicle went off the side of the road and hit a pole before stopping in the northbound lane facing west. The child was sitting in a booster seat directly behind the front driver's seat. Oh, this is so tragic. What a tragic story. She said, not only did I lose my son, I lost my best friend. Oh, that's the husband saying that. It's, you can't really comprehend that level of grief as a father to lose your son and also your partner. Your partner goes to prison and your son dies because of your partner's actions. And then look at the damage. A photograph of state police fire marshals investigating the scene of a fire along Foot of 10 Road on Monday morning in Atlanta. Oh, man. I mean, this bad news is really getting to me. We're getting to a point now where I'm just like, really? Like, how much worse could it get? The fire in the Bronx yesterday, that one nearly finished me off. I was like, really? The tragedy of this. It's just so unjust. Partisan maneuvers precede map vote on the front of the Tribune Review this morning for this Tuesday. This is also from Pennsylvania. It says, this is from Harrisburg specifically, the House is expected to vote on a proposed congressional map this week as spring primary deadlines in a lawsuit that asked Pennsylvania's highest court to take over the highly consequential process loom. Lyons told Spotlight that the chamber will likely consider amendments to the proposal on Tuesday, with the final vote expected on Wednesday. This is about redrawing boundary lines, of course. Again, in the hope of lassoing some more Republicans. That's what they do. Try and lasso more Republicans in this redrawn boundary line. You know, if they're not going to win, then why not just cheat? Armstrong County suspends jury trials. Judge issues order to slow viruses spread. And increasingly, COVID-infected staff stay on the job. Now, this is something that I read about yesterday and blew my mind. You know, before it was like a week. If you get coronavirus, you can't go back to work for a week. Then they reduced it to 5 days. Now, if you have minor symptoms or no symptoms, you can go to work, even if you're a nurse or a doctor. You can go in. This is how desperate it has become. It is like a war zone out there. Sending people to work with coronavirus. Can you imagine, like, having that conversation a year ago? This is what Omicron is. This is an epidemic. The move is a reaction to severe hospital staff shortages and crushing caseloads that the Omicron variant is causing. California health authorities announced over the weekend that hospital staff members who test positive but are symptom-free can continue working. Some hospitals in Rhode Island and Arizona have likewise told employees they can stay on the job if they have no symptoms or just mild ones. 700,000 cases a day in the US on average, obliterating the record set a year ago. It's incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. This is what we're living with now. When's the good news coming? Oh, yes. The Pennsylvania Farm Show's annual butter sculpture pays homage to dairy farmers. Well, this is very cute. Somebody has sculpted in butter and kept it cold, I presume. I guess it's in a refrigerated space. An image of, it looks like a family of dairy farmers. I mean, it's a very small picture. It's very hard to see. But that's what it looks like. I'm trying to zoom in on it. This is on the front of the newspaper. The Pennsylvania Farm Show's annual butter sculpture. And the headline is, Honor Spreads. See? You couldn't make that up. Okay, what's next? Let's take a look at the Herald News Oregon. The link to that one is a little bit strange. It's not quite working. I wonder why. There we go. It's okay, I think I've got it now. Klamath economy buoyed by federal dollars. Inflation remains a focus and concern. And pandemic and politics cloud Oregon's 2022 legislature prospects. Do you know something? I'm really pleased now, because I've been saying, you've probably heard me banging on for weeks about this state legislature and the corruption that's going on there, putting Trump people into state legislatures, which means that they're the ones that have to decide whether the count goes blue or red. And so they're saying that there is the potential that these people could rig it at a state level before it is sent to the vice president to be ratified, in Congress. And this now has become the big topic of conversation. Finally, this is now the thing that everybody is realizing is the true test of our democracy. But there is some concern. So this speech that Biden's gone to Georgia to make today has been blighted by the fact that Stacey Abrams, the great voting rights advocate from Atlanta, Georgia, is not there. And I don't quite know the detail of why she's not there, but she's not there. And what this does is it shows that the Democrats, if there is indeed unless there is a logical excuse for this, shows that the Democrats are not singing from the same hymn sheet. And that Biden is, I tweeted this morning, Biden tweeted something about, voting rights is the most important thing, and I just tweeted, this is Biden's inner monologue. Biden appears to have no solutions as to how any of this, passing these two voting bills can be changed that I'm aware of, because they don't have the votes for it. Conservative Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, they're not going to vote for it. So how do you convince Congress and the Senate that voting rights is worth fighting for? I mean, it's a joke that we're even having this conversation. Every single Republican is against voting rights reform. Not a solitary one of them is for it. What does that say to you about the country? Because they don't want people to vote. Fewer votes means that, because this is the problem, Democrats tend not to vote either, so fewer votes will mean that Republicans stand a better chance. The more people that vote, the less chance Republicans have of winning. And they don't want people to vote. This is voter suppression. This is what happens in countries that we've looked to for years as bad examples of democracies. And yet it's happening here. The front of the Kentucky Inquirer this morning. Doctors offer advice for using at-home kits. Yeah, what's the advice? There aren't any. Where do we get these things from? The test kits can be hard to find. Prices are going up. You want to blow the testing process? You don't want to blow the testing process, so maybe you'll research the best way to swab. Should you check out a YouTube video, search online for physicians' opinions, or look in the box instructions? You might do all of the above. but Cincinnati area doctors familiar with the tests and the US Food and Drug Administration caution that the latest tips online are not always ideal. One is to get a throat swab or use a nasal swab as a throat swab. What? They say that throat swabs are not very effective, and there are molecules that sometimes interfere with the test and make it invalid. Just the nose. Just do the nose. The FDA has issued safety concerns about self-collection with throat swabs. They're more complicated than nasal swabs, and if used incorrectly can harm the person getting swabbed. Oh yeah, this is going to become a new pandemic. People with swabs down their throat. I mean, this is the problem when you have no healthcare system in this country. There is no healthcare system. You know, the fact that tests are getting more expensive suggests to me that something is severely wrong. The test should be free like in every other country. Only America charges people to test for coronavirus at home. It should be free. It's a pandemic. It's not our fault. I was thinking about the additional cost of the pandemic on people, you know, childcare. And I mean, we're about to send our son to a new school. And it's very expensive because you can't get free preschool yet here. And it's very expensive, but part of the reason why we're going to pay the money is because he has not been socialized in the last 2 years. We want him to be in a larger school with more kids where he can learn how to have some skills. Because as a 3-year-old, he spent 2 of the last 3 years indoors in a mask without other humans. This is the additional cost of the pandemic, and it's the people who are paying the price. Prosecutor deters war on illegal guns, continues no plea deals policy remains in effect with some exceptions based on cases. This is days after a mass shooting this summer in a crowded downtown park. Hamilton County prosecutor Joe deters, is that his name? Joe deters. I think it is. Excuse me, I sneezed. Phew, that was a big one. So is the guy's name prosecutor deters. War on illegal guns continues. I see. So I read that as the prosecutor deters a war on illegal guns. But the guy's name is deters. I mean, of all the names for a prosecutor. Hello to Kobe, Michael, Stacey, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Stacey's having peanut butter sandwiches with chips and cookies. This is it's I'll say nothing about the nutrition. I'll just say nothing. It's probably better. I also had peanut butter already this morning, which is, you know, the thing about peanut butter, and for me as a plant-based person, it's such a brilliant snack. Because, of course, if you buy good peanut butter, the only ingredients of that peanut butter should be peanuts. Nothing else. Nothing else. No oil, because peanuts have their own oil. No canola oil, no salt, no sugar, nothing. Just smushed peanuts. So please look on the label and just check that it's just peanuts in there. Because, you know, a lot of these places, they smuggle in a bunch of other stuff and it turns out not to be peanut butter at all. You know, it's like salt butter. Let's go to the New York Times. There's a photograph of a volunteer sorting donations for survivors of the blaze that swept through the residential Bronx building on Sunday morning. 2 open doors created a chute of deadly flames. 17 fatalities now of the Bronx apartment blaze. Look to be from smoke inhalation. 17 of the fatalities. It says the 17 people killed in the Bronx fire this week all died from inhaling smoke that poured through a single malfunctioning door and billowed to the top of the 19-story building. New York officials said on Monday as they investigated how a fire that barely spread beyond 1 unit became the city's most lethal in 3 decades. The fire's origin appeared straightforward. A space heater that had been left running continuously burst into flames. A day later, though, residents remained stunned by the speed with which the smoke inundated the building, killing and critically injuring so many people in broad daylight, even as firefighters arrived within minutes. The tower, considered a model affordable housing project when it was constructed in 1972, did not have a building-wide sprinkler system, as was allowed under the law. But it was deadly smoke sucked into an internal stairwell, not flames, that overcame residents as they fled the building. Yeah, I mean, come on. This is like... I mean, what this is going to do now, and this is what happened in England off the back of the Grenfell Tower fire a couple of years ago, was that it will suddenly change the laws, or hopefully change the law, on fire rules, retardants and sprinklers and fire doors and smoke alarms. They're now going to go and check them all. Whereas before there was a little complacency, now they're going to go check them all. And unfortunately, this is what happens. We have to wait for a tragedy before they can impose new regulations on safety. And it, famously happened in London. I always reference, we had a fire at a big train station in the early 1980s. And it started on an escalator, because escalators in England used to be made of wood. Do you remember this, Carla? The King's Cross fire was the most deadly fire in kind of London history, apart from the Great Fire of London, of course. And it all started with a cigarette butt on a wooden escalator. In my childhood, I remember going on the escalators in train subway stations, and they were made of wood. And the King's Cross fire, which was devastating, was the turning point for that legislation. And from that point onwards, escalators were made of steel and aluminium. And so it's just very interesting, isn't it? That, you have to wait for a disaster. We had it with, ferries overturning, famous ferries overturning in London as well, where they, changed the law on seafaring safety. And so it'll happen here in the Bronx, I have no doubt. They're going to apply some new laws so that landlords of these properties and building managers of these properties will have to now go in and make the necessary changes. I mean, here in California, where I live, that you're not allowed to have a smoke alarm that's not hardwired. All the smoke alarms, by law, have to be wired to the mains. My landlord has not done that. He's got battery-operated smoke alarms. And in fact, they don't really work, so we've taken them down. That's the reality, of living in a kind of rented accommodation, is that you're at the mercy of the landlord who wants to be cheap. There's a certain cheapness associated with this. Slightly worrying, isn't it? Slightly worrying. They said as the fire burned, the smoke was drawn through the broken door on the 3rd floor towards an open stairwell door high above on the 15th floor. If you had that door on the upper floors open, that's really going to give you a flue effect, like a chimney. And that's what occurred, said Jim Long, a spokesman for the fire department. 15 people remain in critical condition, officials said. Mayor Eric Adams revised the official death count, saying the city now believed that 17 people had died as of Monday afternoon, 8 of them children, down from the 19 initially reported. It was smoke that took these lives, not the fire itself, Mr. Adams said in a radio interview. He said that any maintenance issues related to the self-closing door remaining wide open will be part of the investigation into the fire, with fire marshals and cleaning crews in white protective suits still combing the singed and smoke-stained scene. Brutal images of the tower from East 181st Street through the Bronx and New York City, and as far away as Gambia, the small West African nation from which many of the victims had emigrated. So families of the victims couldn't even identify the body in person because of COVID-19 rules. So they had to identify people via FaceTime. Oh, man. So this is, the reality of, yet again, the poor. It's always the poor that bear the brunt, There's rarely a fire in an expensive mansion that, wealthy people live in because they have to comply to modern building codes and they want to have protection, fire systems, burglary systems, like they spend money on this stuff. But the poor are left, to fend for themselves. The value of life is obviously lower in the minds of some. US and Russia still at odds on NATO after talks, also on the front of the New York Times this morning. It says the US and Russia emerged from 7 hours of urgent negotiations on Monday, staking out seemingly irreconcilable. There we go, got there in the end. Irreconcilable. The reason I'm having trouble with it is because it's hyphenated. It's going across the paragraph. And also, I've just woken up. That's not true. It's been a long morning already this morning. But you are the first person I've spoken to. And the deployment of troops and weapons on Eastern Europe keeping tensions high amid fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you know, I've revised my prediction now. I don't think he's going to do anything. I don't think Putin's going to do anything. I think it's all posturing. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, Russia's lead negotiator, insisted after the meeting it was absolutely mandatory that Ukraine never, ever became a NATO member. His American counterpart, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, reiterated the United States could never make such a pledge because we will not allow anyone to slam closed NATO's open-door policy. And she said the United States and its allies would not stand by if Russia sought to change international borders by force. The impasse left the fate of Ukraine, which was not invited to the bilateral talks, in a state of uncertainty, with Russia's military intentions far from resolved, following hastily scheduled meetings between Ms. Sherman and Mr. Ryabkov on Sunday night and Monday. Yeah, I don't think Putin's going to do anything. I think this was all a gamble, Manchin's votes to back miners or coal bosses. Yes, Joe Manchin, everybody's favourite Conservative operative. It says for years... I actually called him a Conservative operative in 5-Minute News today. I actually used that word. That's my new phrase for him. He's a Conservative operative. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. It says for years, burly men in camouflage hunting jackets have been a constant presence in the Capitol Hill office of Senator Joe Manchin III. Their Unite Mine Workers logos giving away their mission to lobby not only for the interests of coal, but also on more personal matters such as pensions, healthcare and funding to address black lung disease. So when the Miners' Union in West Virginia and the West Virginia AFL came out last month with statements pleading for passage of Biden's Build Back Better Act, just hours after Mr. Manchin, Democrat in name only of West Virginia, said he was a no, the Capitol took notice. It says, with the miners now officially on the opposite side of the mine owners, it signaled the escalation of a behind-the-scenes struggle centered in Mr. Manchin's home state to sway the balking senator, whose skepticism about his party's marquee domestic policy measure has emerged as a potentially fatal impediment to its enactment. And while most of his attention to the fate of the social safety net and climate change bill is fixed on ideological divisions among Democrats over its largest provisions and overall cost, the battle underway over parochial issues in Mr. Manchin's state could ultimately matter more than the public pleas. I mean, Manchin is going to definitely derail I'm now, I had some optimism a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm kind of resigned to the fact that this social and climate bill is not going to happen, and they're going to end up having to do elements of it through executive orders in other ways. So they'll say, okay, we got it done, but we just didn't pass it as a giant bill. We're doing it in dribs and drabs because we don't need Manchin because he's And then Manchin, I actually believe that Manchin will probably defect to the Republican Party at some point. I think he will defect. And that will be a huge issue for Biden because he would have lost the Senate. Heart of a genetically altered pig is transplanted into a human, also on the front of the New York Times this morning. I mean, there's something brilliant about this, isn't there? There's something rather brilliant about it. Because, I nearly said human pigs. Because pigs have very similar organs to us, not just the heart. If a pig ready for slaughter, the heart is the right size to be a human heart. Their kidneys, their liver, they're all similar. And the reason is because a lot of humans actually look like pigs. So, this is why it works. You have to look like a bit of a pig in order to not reject a pig heart. I'm not saying that this 57-year-old man looked like a pig. But what I am saying is that if they can make this work, just think. There's an abundance of pigs and a shortage of human donor organs. Just think how amazing it would be if this whole thing of the organ donor register and waiting for somebody to die to give life to somebody else, all of that became history. People could be buried or cremated with all of their organs because we're using pig organs to transplant into humans successfully. I mean, it's the stuff of Dr. Frankenstein, of Mary Shelley, but it's also the stuff of a successful modern technological society. I'm all for it. A 57-year-old man with life-threatening heart disease has received a pig heart. The genetically modified pig is a groundbreaking procedure that offers hope to hundreds of thousands of patients with failing organs. It's the first successful transplant of a pig's heart into a human being. The 8-hour operation took place in Baltimore on Friday. The patient, David Bennett of Maryland, was doing well on Monday, according to surgeons at the University of Maryland Medical Center. It creates the pulse, it creates the pressure. It is his heart, said Dr. Bartley Griffiths, the director of the cardiac transplant program at the medical center, who performed the operation. It's working, and it looks normal, and we are thrilled, but we don't know what tomorrow will bring. This has never been done before. Yes, the baboon heart implant of the 1980s was not as successful. The patient lasted 21 days. Yeah, they don't know. This guy is a guinea pig. Well, a pig. So I have a view on this. I also have another view on this. Some people believe, myself included, that in our heart, in addition to the ventricles and the chambers and the various elements that make up the human heart, there is also a brain. Do you know about this, Carla? There's a whole theory called the little brain in the heart. It's called the little brain in the heart. And people believe that there are neurons in the brain, the same in the heart, the same as you have in your brain. And this is why we experience heartache, sadness. This is why when we have emotions, we feel it in our heart. Because it is said that there are neurons there. And it is referred to in science as the little brain in the heart. And this is something that I am interested to know if it still exists in a pig heart. And if you are transplanted the heart of a pig, are you going to feel things in your soul, in your heart, in the same way that you would do with a human heart? Does a pig heart have neurons in it? I doubt that it does. I doubt that pigs feel sadness in the way that humans do. And I really do believe that the heart is more than just a pump. I think the heart has an additional neuroscientific element to it. And I used to read a lot about the little brain in the heart and how it, some people had evidence that it was a thing. Some people deny it. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory because, no one's going to live or die by it. But it is a fundamentally interesting theory that exists in the scientific community about the little brain in the heart. Hokey. Well, let's look at whether or not there are neurons in the heart. This is something that I think is really where this lies. It's a very interesting subject, isn't it? There is the potential for you to have a kind of auxiliary brain in your heart. It's only very small. We're talking like not the kind of neuron power that we have in our brains, but just something, an element of it in the heart. And would receiving a donor heart, a pig heart, change you significantly? Or is all of our character and all of our personality, all of our emotions just in our brain? Interesting. Carlos found an article that says that it's nonsense because the neurons in a heart and brain cells are very different. But I said to you, it's just a theory, It's not a theory. It's not necessarily fact. It's just a theory that is often discussed. And it's something that I find very interesting. The idea that our heart has more, does more, behaves in a way that we feel it. I mean, maybe that feeling of anxiety, that feeling that we get in our chest is not our heart at all. Maybe it's our lungs. Maybe it's a shortness of breath. Maybe it's our intercostal muscles tensing. Maybe it's our diaphragm. Maybe it's all of them contributing to the feeling of heartache. But it's a wonderful subject to analyze and to think about and to theorize. The little brain in the heart. There's a story on the front of the New York Times this morning about Robert Durst, scion and killer with life made for the tabloids. Robert A. Durst, the scion of a New York real estate dynasty, whose life dissolved in a calamity of suspicions over the unsolved disappearance of his first wife, the execution-style murder of a longtime confidant, and the killing and dismemberment of a neighbor, died early Monday as a prisoner in Stockton, California. He was 78. His lawyer, Chip Lewis, confirmed his death at the San Joaquin General Hospital, where Mr. Durst had been taken for testing. He then went into cardiac arrest and could not be revived, Mr. Lewis said. Mr. Durst had been serving a life sentence at the California healthcare facility in the killing of his longtime confidant, Susan Berman. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, he didn't look well in the last few years. He was recently, convicted, and even in court, he really just looked like a corpse with a faint heartbeat. So I don't think anybody's, sad about his loss in this way based upon him being found guilty. And I don't really know enough about his story. I tend to shy away from stories of like murders and serial killers, and I'm not interested. Some people love it, true crime and that kind of stuff. And I was actually talking about this morning a little bit. The idea that we have so much death and destruction in the real world. Whether it be a fire in the Bronx, or whether it be a worldwide pandemic, or whether it be a terrorist attack, or whether it be a drone strike, or whether it be, Palestinians versus Israelis, or whether it be Ukraine versus Russia, or, the Turkish border. I mean, all of this stuff. Why would you want to dramatize this? Why would you want to go to the cinema or watch a TV show that just had more of this, that was fiction-based? When our reality is so dramatic, when our reality is so destructive and so dark, and is a reality true crime show playing out, in our world, on our planet. It reminds me of the footage of 9/11. Do you remember when the smoke was billowing down the street and people were running away from it, and they were literally running as fast as they could, and the smoke eventually engulfed them? Do you remember those scenes? If you watch a Marvel movie, you see exactly the same thing. People running from an explosion, and eventually, boom, the smoke engulfs them. It's in all the films now. Why would you want to recreate for entertainment the darkest day in American cultural history? Why is that entertaining? Why is it that we watch the true footage and we feel such sadness in our little brains and our hearts? And yet, we also go to the cinema to see exactly the same thing that is created in CGI for the purposes of entertainment. I don't get it. I do not want to see images of death and destruction for entertainment purposes. I just don't want to see that. I want to see Larry David arguing over the flavor of ice cream. And the woman in front of the line who wants to taste all the flavors before he can get a chance to get his ice cream. That's what I want to see. I would never watch a horror movie. I would never watch anything that is going to give me additional anxiety, Now, maybe if you don't read the news, or you don't watch the news, or you don't engage with the news, or you're politically, non-plus, then maybe you need to kind of, you need some of that jeopardy in your life, and you would go to the movies or watch a horror film or something like that. Maybe that is, maybe that's how you medicate. But my life, because I submerge myself in the news that is true, the idea of seeing it done for dramatic purposes is of no interest to me. I want to watch Frozen 2 and see happy things. I just can't handle it. I'm in a horror movie. I'm in a very good British horror movie. If you're a horror fan, the film is called Ghost Stories. Stars Martin Freeman. It came out maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I'm actually in that. Ghost Stories. And it's quite horrific. I have seen that. So, how do we get onto this? Oh yes, putting a pig's heart into a human and keeping their fingers crossed that the guy is going to remain living. I mean, it would be amazing if he did. Do you know how they've done this, by the way? They've turned off some of the genes that the human body would reject. So they now have the technology to turn on and turn off genes. So they've implanted human genes into this heart in the lab to give it the human genetic code, and they've switched off the pig genes in this heart that prevent it from living successfully in the human, and they've done all this in the lab prior to the transplant. It's very interesting because they haven't had the technology to do this till now, and this is why this is the first of its kind. Last year, 41,354 Americans received transplanted organs, more than half of them receiving kidneys, according to the United Network for Organ Sharing, a non-profit that coordinates the nation's organ procurement efforts. But there is an acute shortage of organs, and about a dozen people on the list die each year. Last year, 3,817 Americans received human donor hearts as replacements, more than ever before, but the potential demand is still higher. I mean, that in itself is another conversation, isn't it? Receiving another human's heart. Because you still have to take anti-rejection drugs, don't you? Because, human organs are not directly compatible. Because we're all a little bit different. And the immune system is designed to fight anything alien in the human body, you know? The immune system attacks it, so you have to take, these immunosuppressant drugs, which obviously make you susceptible to getting other viruses, illnesses, because your immune system is suppressed. And you can't win. You can't win. This is why people are immunocompromised and they can't take the vaccines, because they might be on, immunosuppressant drugs because they've had a heart transplant. So what if you're not going to die because you've got a broken heart? You're going to die because you get coronavirus because your immune system's suppressed. This is the reality. I mean, it sounds like a movie script, but this is the reality. It sounds like something out of Dr. Strangelove. The pig heart and the... Oh, man. Anyway, if the cup is half full, we wish the recipient of the genetically altered pig heart all the luck in the world. Because I really genuinely want him. His name's David Bennett. I really want him to live longer than 21 days. That would be ideal. He's actually been alive for 3 or 4 days now. They did it. They waited to announce it till they just checked that he wasn't going to die. Stacey says, I don't like horror movies either, but I do love comedies. Well, you see, this is my theory. I think that if you want to medicate with entertainment, medicate with something funny. Laughter is the great antidote to the reality of our planet right now. And I'm very happy to kind of embrace that aspect of everything. Stacey, do you have a favorite comedy you could recommend? Maybe we should just do this instead. We should just recommend favorite comedies instead of talking about, Ukraine crisis and pig transplant stuff. I really feel like we are at a point now where maybe the answer is just to, like my friend Andy, who's in horror movies and works in the horror business and loves horror films. If I send him a news story, on WhatsApp, that is about something, worldly, like the rise of fascism and the fall of democracy. He's like, don't send me this stuff. I don't need it. I don't want to feel this stuff. And yeah, I'm like, but you watch horror films. I don't get it. Brian Cox said something very interesting. Not the actor from Succession, but he's the British version of Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's like our space guy. He said, would you rather just be like staring at your phone, looking at celebrities on Instagram, or looking up and out and learning about the universe? Like, where would you rather spend your life if you have a choice? Down here or up there? He said, because there's so much to learn about, there's so much to discover. There's infinite galaxies and endless places that we can consider and theorize and enjoy and feel so small. And yet people have this obsession with like scrolling through other people's lives. I did do Instagram for a while and I stopped it because I could tell that it was unhealthy. I knew that it was like sucking the life out of me. And I really feel now I post on it for my friends and family on a private account, but I don't look at other people's posts or stories. If someone says to me, I've just been on this great trip or something, then I will specifically go in and look at their account for like 1 minute. But I don't devote any time to Instagram anymore. Because like Brian Cox says, look up, I've seen some amazing sunsets in the last few days here in California. Just incredible. And sunrises. I actually put on my Instagram a photograph of a sunrise that was so completely epic. It was at 6:45 in the morning, yesterday morning. And I was like, this is the stuff, nature affords us such beauty. Will, good morning. Thank you for joining us from California. Nature affords us so many great visuals that to watch like CGI explosions just seems like, you know. I started to watch Succession again yesterday. I've given up on it about 6 times, the latest season of Succession, with the other Brian Cox. And I just can't watch it. It means nothing to me. Like it's a whole... Yeah, I just don't have the head for it right now. I would love to. But I honestly think that to get into something like Succession, your mind needs to be pretty clear. You know? How do we qualify watching other people's bad news and tribulations? Because, you know, Succession is just as people kind of falling out with each other and arguing and taking sides and being passive-aggressive. That's basically what Succession is, just with a nice theme tune, you know, with some good music. But the reality is that you would need to have none of that type of stuff in your life in order to give yourself the time to watch that show. And I wish I had that time. It's very interesting. Will's with us, Kobe, Stacey, Michael. Good morning, all of you. Great to know that you're part of the show. Okay, let's move on in our agenda this morning. We've done the New York Times. Let's jump on to the Austin American Statesman. I guess that's for Texas. Let's have a look here. And they lead this morning with Abbott already targeting O'Rourke. Oh, that's right. Yes, Greg Abbott, the governor there, possibly the worst governor in America, has announced that he's going to run for office again. It says the race for Texas governor began in earnest over the weekend. Governor Greg Abbott took to the stage in McAllen to launch his bid for a 3rd term in office. Abbott told supporters he is running for re-election to keep Texas on the right track, touting the work he's done to secure the Texas-Mexico border and highlighting legislative victories for his party over the past 2 years on taxes, education, and infrastructure funding. That's the Texas that we've worked so hard to create, he said on Saturday, but we must fight to keep it that way because some want a completely different Texas. We cannot let big government liberals redesign our state with a progressive agenda that is destroying some parts of America. We need a proven winner who will fight to secure the future of Texas. I mean, it's a very impressive pitch, isn't it? But it's garbage. Greg Abbott has done nothing for Texas. Texas is desperate for somebody who's got a big idea because the problem is that Greg Abbott, you know, Texas is oil rich, you know, and there's a new factory. They're building a $1.1 billion Tesla factory in southeastern Travis County. They're calling it Giga Texas. Meanwhile, Tesla's also about to close. Being able to produce cars at its Travis County manufacturing facility, with at least one industry analyst saying the automaker could start rolling out Texas-built vehicles as early as this week. I mean, so what? It's moving from one part of Texas to another part? I'm a bit confused here. They're building a new gigafactory. They're closing one in Austin, and they're opening one in Travis County. I think that's what's happening. Yeah, I think that's what's happening. Yeah, it's moving its corporate headquarters to Austin. It has yet to make any announcements about the start of production. However, construction of the facility has moved swiftly since Tesla announced in July 2020 it had chosen the Austin area for the factory, which has been dubbed Giga Texas. Elon Musk and other executives had previously predicted that production could start at the factory before the end of 2021. Well, that didn't happen. They say it's possible Tesla could start producing vehicles as early as this week. And they're going to build the Model Y there as well, which is the one that's really everyone's going to buy, isn't it? It's like an SUV, but it's the cheap version. I say cheap, it's still like 45 grand. But that is cheap for a luxury car. Pope links vaccination with a moral obligation. This is a story out of Rome. Pope Francis. I think Francis might be my favorite pope so far. I mean, prior to Francis, I was a big fan of John Paul II. The middle guy, I wasn't that interested in. Benedict. Wasn't into him so much. But then again, he wasn't into poping very much either. He quit. Did you see The Two Popes, that wonderful movie with Anthony Hopkins? I mean, that was a wonderful film. No, not Jude Law. No, the other British actor playing the other Pope. Oh, what's his name? The Two Popes. Come on, you remember. It was such a lovely film. What a lovely film. And I looked up the making of that film because I get very interested in how films are produced. And, all of that Vatican visual, that was all CGI. The whole thing. They pretty much shot that film on green screen. It was so amazing to me. It was completely convincing. This is where, good use of CGI happens. CGI doesn't need to mean explosions and crashes and all of this, craziness. It can also mean, repainting the Vatican on a green screen and having two actors just sit there and share and you be completely convinced that they are where they say they are. There's a lot of room for, the CGI world outside of the action movie. And of course, off the back of the misfire of the gun on that film that resulted in the death of the cinematographer, they're saying now that all gunshots on movie sets need to be done in CGI. There's no reason for real bullets to exist on a movie set when CGI can do it just as well, if not better. Interesting. Oh, I've missed out some newspapers. Let's go back to the 9:15 ones. Oh yes, the Cincinnati Enquirer. Okay, well yeah, let's do the US news update. Okay, so I've got the Cincinnati Enquirer to come. I've got the LA Times to come, and we've got the Decatur Daily from Alabama. Those are our newspapers that we'll do in just a few moments. First, let's do the US News Update. It's the daily podcast that I produce that enables you to catch up on what's happening across the United States. And you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Here it is. It's Tuesday, January 11th. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. Health authorities around the US are increasingly taking the extraordinary step of allowing nurses and other workers infected with the coronavirus to stay on the job if they have mild symptoms or none at all. The move is a reaction to the severe hospital staffing shortages and crushing caseloads that the Omicron variant is causing. California health authorities announced over the weekend that hospital staff members who test positive but symptom-free can continue working. Some hospitals in Rhode Island and Arizona have likewise told employees they can stay on the job if they have no symptoms or just mild ones. The highly contagious Omicron variant has sent new cases of COVID-19 exploding to over 700,000 a day in the US on average, obliterating the record set a year ago. The number of Americans in the hospital with the virus is running at around 110,000, just short of the peak of 124,000 last January. Many hospitals are not only swamped with cases, but severely short-handed because of so many employees out with COVID-19. At the same time, Omicron appears to be causing milder illness than the Delta variant. Last month, the CDC said that healthcare workers who have no symptoms can return to work after 7 days with a negative test, but the isolation time can be cut further if there are staffing shortages. Meanwhile, the United States staggered through a steady onslaught of deadly billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, while the nation's greenhouse gas emissions last year jumped 6%, putting America further behind its 2030 climate change cutting goal. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. It's 10 o'clock, but it's the 11th of January, 2022. Welcome to Backchannel. And I can't believe it's the 11th of January. I really feel like... I still can't believe it's 2022. You know you're getting older when you can, like, accidentally forget that it's 20 years after the date you think it is. I mean, like, isn't it 2002? No, that was 20 years ago. 2002 was a huge year for me. You know, that was a really good year for me. I announced on the Commonwealth Games that year in 2002. Introduced the Queen. It was a big year for me, and that was 20 years ago. It's insane. I was working at a little radio station in southwest London, and announcing for the BBC at the same time. Isn't that crazy? 20 years ago. Decador Daily, the independent voice of the Tennessee Valley since 1912. Blood marks victims' last steps. I don't know if I want to read that out. I'm kind of done with this blood-stained stories this morning. Mixed-use development in the works. They say downtown could get a combination of retail residential development on 2nd Avenue. Yes, well, you know, this is the gentrification of all places. Vaccines help individuals respect health of others. This is what Pope Francis was saying. That's right. He suggested on Monday that getting vaccinated against the coronavirus was a moral obligation and denounced how people had been swayed by baseless information to refuse one of the most effective measures to save lives during the pandemic. Francis used some of his strongest words yet, calling for people to get vaccinated, in a speech to ambassadors accredited to the Holy See, an annual event in which he sets out the Vatican's foreign policy goals for the year. 85-year-old Francis has generally shied away from speaking about vaccination as a moral obligation, though his COVID-19 advisors have referred to it as a moral responsibility. Rather, Francis has termed vaccination as an act of love, and that refusing to get inoculated was suicidal. Where was the Pope a year ago when we needed him to say this? You know? It took your time. The misinformation has been rife. I had a wonderful argument with my Republican landlord the other day about all of this. Just literally will not get vaccinated. Is convinced that it is a conspiracy by Big Pharma. But he doesn't say much more than that. He just hears these things on Fox News, so I can't talk to him. You know, I can't engage with him on this subject. He doesn't want to talk about it. He just wants to, like, shout at me, say a few things. The hilarious thing is that we're really good friends, and he's a very good landlord, and he fixes things when he says he's going to, and all that kind of stuff. But he and I are just very, very different when it comes to this type of subject, you know? He's just... the guy is... And his whole family, his wife, who's like in her late 70s, and his daughter, who's 40, none of them want to get vaccinated. And, you know, they've all had COVID. And I guess they think that because they survived it, that's proof. It just, like, doubles down on their theory that they were right all along, that it wasn't necessary to get vaccinated. That's the level of qualitative research they need to do in order to be convinced that they are right. Well, we got COVID and we're not vaccinated and we're fine. No consideration for other people. No consideration for giving it to other people, for transmitting it. You know, no consideration for the fact that collective responsibility means that we all need to be vaccinated. We all need to take every possible measure to get to the end of this pandemic. He doesn't even wear a mask anymore. He doesn't care. He just doesn't care. He thinks the whole thing is a joke. Also on the front of the Decador Daily is the same story about the human donor receiving a pig heart, saying it's a medical first. Next up, the Los Angeles Times. Newsom details $286.4 billion budget proposal. Now, I did want to talk about this because I heard that Gavin Newsom is going to be giving free healthcare to immigrants living in California who are undocumented, which I think is amazing. You know, rather wonderful. Governor seeks close to $10 billion in new spending on COVID, climate, homelessness, inequality, and safety. Billy, thank you for joining us, Billy. Nice to know. Stacey had to go, so Billy, you can take her place in this small little enclave we have in the corner of the internet. Rajar is with us. Will is with us. Kobe and Michael, thank you for spending your morning with Backchannel. Built on projections of a 9th consecutive year of surplus tax revenue, a streak that has made California's deficit-ridden past a distant memory, the $286 billion spending plan Governor Gavin Newsom unveiled on Monday builds on the state's recent efforts to address the COVID-19 pandemic, homelessness, and a worsening drought, while surpassing K-12 school funding records just set last year. It says, in all, the governor's plan lays out close to $10 billion in new spending on what a fact sheet from his office calls 5 of California's biggest challenges: COVID-19, climate change, homelessness, inequality, and keeping our streets safe. In broad terms, Newsom's proposal to the legislature is consistent with budgets written in recent years. While it would direct surplus tax revenue towards the state's cash reserves and pay down some long-term debts, there would be plenty left over for programs championed by the Democratic governor and legislators from both parties, such as enhanced security at clinics that provide abortions and cancellation of an increase in California's gas tax that was scheduled for July. They say we have the capacity to invest in our growth engines, invest in the future, as well as making sure that we prepare for the uncertainties that the future presents. Most of the plan covers spending in the fiscal year that begins July 1st, but the governor is also taking legislators for immediate action to expand the state's COVID-19 pandemic response, seeking authorization to quickly spend about half of the $2.7 billion budget proposal to boost testing, vaccinations, and healthcare staffing across the state. So, I do feel very proud to live in California. I genuinely believe that it's one of the few places that really does put the poor first. And you know why it's able to do that? Because it's a very rich state. It's the 5th richest economy in the world. Did you know that? You know that California, as a state, has a bigger economy than the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is 6th on the list. California is now 5th. The UK used to be 5th. It's very interesting, isn't it, that a solitary state in the US can have a bigger GDP, make more money than the entirety of England, Scotland, and Wales put together, and Northern Ireland. Carla doesn't believe me. She's looking it up. She's like, really? Yeah. California is the 5th richest economy in the world. Was I right or was I right? Yeah, it's true. She's like, wow. I can see her mouthing. Wow. And, you know, that's why these types of numbers, yes? That's right. Texas has a bigger economy than Canada, but that's oil. That's oil. That's what it is. It's an economy that, you know, this is the reason why, you know, climate change will never be taken seriously by Republicans, because oil is so valuable to them. Their entire livelihood is built on the back of the oil business. You know? That's what that TV show Dallas was all about, wasn't it? You know, they lived in Texas. They had this wealthy, healthy lifestyle. They had a ranch, and yet, you know, the Ewings were oil barons. Also on the front of the LA Times, California surpasses 6 million COVID cases. It says more than 6 million cumulative coronavirus cases have now been reported in California, according to data compiled by the LA Times, as the Omicron variant continues its staggering spread. The record-setting pace of infections is putting pressure on hospitals, schools, and other institutions, which are struggling to maintain full services as some employees take time off to deal with COVID-19. I kind of know I'm going to get it, you know? Carla, I mean, be prepared for one of us or both of us to have to go off sick. I mean, I'm going to stay here and still do my show even if I have coronavirus. I'm just not going to do it if my symptoms are bad enough to stop me from doing it. But my point is, it is so prevalent now that I fully expect to get it. You know, so many people I know have got it. Yeah, I'm not scared of it because I'm triple vaccinated. That's why I'm not scared of it. And I'll be honest, here's the other thing, is that my work schedule means that I spend such little time lying on the sofa watching television. I just don't ever get to do that. I kind of look forward to having some time off. LA Unified students return in test of district resolve. Yes, hundreds of thousands of Los Angeles Unified students are returning to campuses from winter break today, amid a record-breaking surge in coronavirus cases that is testing the carefully laid plans of educators in the nation's second largest school district to keep classrooms open. LA Unified officials are girding for staffing shortages, large numbers of student absences, and long lines to access campuses for the multitudes of students who will probably need coronavirus tests to meet the district's requirements that a negative test be shown by anyone seeking to enter school grounds. Never has the coronavirus caseload in schools been higher. Yeah. So my daughter started her school today. She tested negative yesterday. And she's double vaccinated now at the age of 6. You know? No side effects. Really interesting. You know, that child dose is so low that there really was 0 side effects for her. She only had like a very slightly sore arm, but nothing more than that. A nice story here. In Mexico, a different miracle on ice. Figure skater takes unlikely arduous path to Olympics. This is about Donovan Carrillo, is the best ice skater in Mexican history, which is a little like being the best bartender at a temperance convention, or best speaker at a school for mimes. They say it's an accomplishment, but not one that is widely understood or appreciated. And that goes a long way toward explaining why Carrillo has been preparing for next month's Olympics in a shopping mall on an undersized rink tucked between a travel agency and a Japanese import store, often sharing the ice with teenagers on dates and frightened preschoolers wobbling on rented skates. It's not like I go to the supermarket and everyone is asking for pictures, Carrillo said. This is an amazing story. He's 22 and he's practicing for next month's Beijing Winter Games on an undersized rink at a shopping mall in Leon, Mexico. You know, if he wins anything at the Olympics, it will be such a wonderful story and such a great kind of moment for Mexico, wouldn't it? Knowing that he doesn't have an Olympic-sized ice rink to practice on. Can you imagine being like a 6-year-old kid and going to the local ice rink in the shopping center and seeing this incredible Mexico's best skater sharing the ice with you. How amazing that would be. Yeah, it's got to be a film. But there was a skating film recently, wasn't there? Was it I, Tonya? Is that what it was? I, Tonya, yeah. That was a good film. That was kind of terrifying, but that was a good film. Okay, so that's how also, let me mention this. I didn't really want to, but this is a photograph of Valentino Orellana Peralta, who's 14. She was struck by a stray bullet as police confronted an assault sect in a store in North Hollywood. And I mean, I guess they're a Catholic family because it's got an open casket, and there's a photograph of the family mourning her and seeing her lying in this open casket, which I've never understood because it's not in my, faith or culture to do open caskets. I had an Irish Catholic friend who was in his late 70s who passed away. And I went to a little mortuary to his funeral, little undertakers, near where he lived. And that was the only time I've seen someone in an open casket. So it doesn't come naturally to me. But here the photograph is of this girl on the front of the Los Angeles Times. And I can see why they've been so explicit with their photography, because they're making the point that a 14-year-old girl has been killed by an LAPD officer. And she's lying now in an open casket with Soledad Peralta saying goodbye to her daughter, Valentina. A parent losing a child at 14 because the LAPD like to shoot people for non-life-threatening events. So there we go. That's the LA Times this morning. And that's how that starts. And have we done the New York Times yet? Yeah, we have. We've just got the Austin American... Oh, no, we did the Austin American Statesman. We've just got one more to do in our paper review. And that is the Caller Times from Corpus Christi, Texas. Let's see what they have to offer this morning. The Caller Times leads with drug addiction vaccine in development phase. This is interesting. It's been nearly 50 years since a group of researchers in Chicago reported an extraordinary finding. They created a vaccine against drug addiction, and an early test showed it might actually work. The scientists provided a rhesus monkey with drugs like heroin and cocaine, and it became addicted. I mean, I already don't like where this story is going. When they injected the monkey with a compound they developed, one designed to coax the immune system into fighting addictive drugs as if they were pathogenic invaders, the animal stopped seeking drugs. Their findings, published in the top scientific journal Nature in 1974, heralded a new frontier in treating addiction. Isn't that amazing? So Marco Prevetoni will lead University of Washington's new center developing vaccines and medications against substance use disorders. Do you know what's so interesting about this is that the very vaccine that my Republican landlord is nervous of, which is the mRNA vaccine, the messenger RNA vaccine, is probably going to be the vaccine that cures drug addiction, cures cancer, cures all of these things, because, they basically have worked out how to teach the body to do its own self-repair. And yet, he's skeptical because of all of the misinformation that he watches on Fox News. I'm not going to call Fox News anymore. I'm just going to call it Fox. It's not a news channel. It just isn't. It's a propaganda channel, in a kind of news format. Cities set to fix potholes in Texas. That's good news. And inflation worries rise, says a poll for the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research finds that management of the COVID-19 pandemic is beginning to recede in the minds of Americans. The virus is increasingly overshadowed by concerns about the economy and personal finances, which are topics that could lift Republicans in this year's midterm elections. Administration officials acknowledge that the public is growing increasingly weary of COVID-19. Many respondents in the survey said they're not suggesting the country ignore the pandemic, but compared with last year, higher percentages of people called out the other issues, including immigration among Republicans and gun control among Democrats, as pressing in 2022. Interesting. Yeah, people haven't ever, will probably never change. Republicans will always crave lower taxes, and Democrats will always crave gun control, and such is the two shall never mix, never the twain shall meet, see eye to eye. And that's why I get so frustrated with Joe Biden and his desire to be bipartisan. The guy is really like singing from a hymn sheet that was written in like the 1980s. He brings spoons to a knife fight. Okay, let's remind you that Backchannel has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs and their one-star cinema review. Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. And also the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, whose program Your Pal Hal directly follows this show at 11 a.m. this morning, PST. That's 2 p.m. Eastern, all here on Backchannel. It's 10:21. I'm Anthony Davis, and welcome to the show. We are looking at voting rights now as Biden plans to deliver a hard-hitting speech in Atlanta. Has he done the speech already? I think he might have done it now. Isn't it done? I thought that it was this morning, saying the issue is fundamental to America, calling for passage of sweeping legislation and denouncing in detail the impact of voting restrictions in states like Georgia. Georgia, of course, which was presided over by Brad Raffensperger, the state legislature, a Republican. That was the perfect phone call that Trump had with Brad. Do you remember where he said you need to find me 11,000 more votes? That's going to be part of Trump's downfall, that phone call. But here's my feeling about Joe Biden with this, because I honestly believe that unless, and the guy is really on the hiding to nothing, because do you remember like years ago it used to be the case that if the president spoke, the world listened? So you could say something like, voting rights are fundamental to America. You can say something like that and people will be like, yes, he's right. Now people are like, yeah, whatever, old man. Let's go, Brandon. Their attitude to the president is very different to how it used to be. And my concern is that he thinks that it's enough for the president to say it out loud and then it must mean something. And I just don't think that kind of impact is available anymore. Yeah, the BLM people feel the same. A speech is, I mean, the thing is, a lot of the news channels, they don't even carry the speech anymore. Fox News won't carry the speech. What they'll do is they'll clip it, they'll cut it up and clip the bits that don't make sense or where he makes a mistake or slips up or falls over on the stage. That's the bit they'll show. In pivoting so fully to voting rights from his recent efforts to pass major social spending, Biden risks opening the new year with a second legislative setback, given the daunting obstacles facing any voting rights package in Congress, including the near-unified opposition of Republicans and the reluctance of some Democrats to ease filibuster rules. So do you vote? I mean, maybe you don't. Maybe you just don't think voting is necessary. Or is it only since you've got older? Do you encourage others to vote? Do you understand the importance of voting? Do you think there isn't any party or candidate that reflects your morals or your ethics? And therefore, what's the point in voting? Or maybe, in contrast, you're an activist. Maybe you're somebody who's run for office. Maybe you've been involved in politics at some level. Because I do think that, voter apathy, this idea that, my vote doesn't count, I think that is dissipating. And I would like to think that people, because of the rise of fascism and the rise of Trump and Trumpism and the cult of Trump and, the Republicans seizing the support of the far right and Nazism and putting it all into one, big right-wing package, I think people are now more likely to want to vote either for that or against that. But Biden going to Georgia today is significant because, of course, that's where the 11,000 missing votes Trump was looking for were nowhere to be found because, of course, they didn't exist. But also, it's significant because the very person that he is supposed to be, who's supposed to be there, who is, a voting rights advocate, Stacey Abrams, I don't know why, we should probably try and find out, but for some reason she is not going to be present at this. And I'm very interested as to what her theory is behind this thinking of not being present. I mean, maybe she's just genuinely not available, but it is interesting to me. Democrats in Washington have been trying to enact a series of sweeping new voting reforms after Republican-controlled states imposed more stringent voting requirements last year. On Tuesday, Biden and Kamala Harris will promote these legislative efforts in Georgia, a state that is both an electoral battleground and home to some of the more sweeping recent Republican-backed voting law changes. And given that Democrats currently control the White House and both chambers of the U.S. Congress, much of the party's voting reform efforts have focused on legislation at the federal level. Among the party's top priorities is restoring some of the most powerful enforcement mechanisms of the Voting Rights Act, a 1960s-era civil rights law that has been weakened in two major Supreme Court decisions, the first in 2013 and the second in 2021. One of the provisions struck down, and which Democrats hope to reinstate, requires the federal government to pre-approve changes to voting procedures in states with a history of discrimination. And that power has been used by the Obama administration to delay moves as minor as the relocation of voting sites or as major as the statewide voter identification laws. I just can't see how they're going to do it if they don't have the votes. I mean, this is really what this is all about, isn't it? It's about... And how can you not get the votes on something as important as voting rights? And let's unpick that for a second, because the Republicans are proud of the fact that they do not want voting rights legislation to be approved. They're not hiding from it. They're saying they actually don't want it. Everybody knows the reason. It's not a secret. It's because they are rigging the system and taking advantage of these loopholes that enable them to rig the system. And it's a combination of gerrymandering and boundary line drawing and installing state legislatures who are sympathetic to the Trump model. Another Democratic goal has been to ensure that the changes to voting procedures enacted during the pandemic, such as an expression of early voting, the greater use of ballot drop boxes, and easier access to absentee and mail-in voting, are kept in place in coming elections. Democratic-controlled legislatures in some states, such as Virginia, Nevada, and Maine, have already taken action. Democrats in Congress, however, are pushing to set federal standards that would apply to every state. So, let's think about this for a second, because it's very important. Why would you want people to have less access to the vote? Why would you want to encourage voter suppression? What is the reason for it? And the only reason for it is because people are less likely to vote against you. You would only do this because if you do this, you are going to get more votes. Well, actually, that's not true. They're not going to get more votes this way. They're going to get fewer opposing votes. There will be fewer people voting Democrat if they suppress the vote, because that's what voter suppression is. And so by removing the ability to vote from all these people, you are effectively rigging the election result in your favor. And that's the Republican model. And they've not made any secret of this. Now, they claim that mail-in voting is open to fraud. Well, that's not true. It just isn't true. And you remember when Trump kept saying that thousands of ballots, millions of ballots were sent out to people? That's not true either. They didn't send out ballots. They send out applications for ballots. You have to request a paper ballot. And in the country that I was born in, mail-in voting is normal. It's standard. In most countries, Western countries, mail-in voting is normal and standard. It's not any more open to fraud. It's not any more open to people taking advantage of. It's completely normal. And yet we're living now in a world where the leader of the free world has convinced people that their free right to vote is compromised. And that's untrue, because America has one of the safest, most stringent voting systems in the world. And yet the former president has undermined that to such an extent that people now, forever after, will claim that the election was rigged. Because he said it. And this is an example of when the president speaks, people listen, because the people that follow him are in his cult. And it's not like that with Democrats. Most Democrats that I know are unhappy about Joe Biden being the president, but they all agree that it was an essential, necessary thing because he was most likely to get elected, and anything had to happen to get rid of Trump. But they recognize that Biden is too old and a little out of touch in terms of how things are done now. Hence his desire to do bipartisanship when the other side have no interest in bipartisanship. At least for the moment, Republicans, it seems, are locked out of power at the national level, so their voting efforts have been focused on state legislatures under their party's control. They've passed limitations on mail-in absentee voting and the use of ballot drop boxes. I mean, ballot drop boxes are essential. Think about it. You know, it's essential. And yet, I don't know. I really worry that we are living now in a world where voter suppression is considered normal in some way. Like they think, yeah, that's okay, that's normal. And yet, it's like if we saw it happen across the world in another country, we'd be up in arms. Oh, it's terrible that would happen. And yet it's happening here in the free world. The free world means a free voice, a free vote, and yet voter suppression is now happening. And yet, you know, a ballot drop box, and let's talk about ballot drop boxes for a second, are a secure way for people to be able to vote and drop off their ballot somewhere where they don't have to go to a polling place, because the polling place, you know, some of these states have one polling place. Are you aware of that? Charlie, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning from Florida. Alex is with us too from California. Will is in California. Kevin, Billy. Nice to know that you're all part of Backchannel this morning. But how is it the case that you can have a solitary polling place in some states that would mean that in order to vote, you would have to get in your car and drive for miles? You know, where I'm from in London, and it's the same across the United Kingdom, you will have a polling place. It has to be within like a few minutes of where you live. Walk. Like you have to be able to walk there. Yeah, you have to take a photograph of you and your dog outside the polling station with a sticker saying, "I voted." I always used to argue with the there would always be a conservative representative standing outside the polling place where I voted, and they'd ask you for your they'd try and take your ballot application form from you and pretend that it was like, oh yes, no, we have to take this, and it's like, and it was a scam, and I used to call them on it all the time. Carla, are you aware of this? They would stand with a blue rosette, but they'd hide their rosette sometimes. They'd hide it under their coat. Oh, this was a whole thing happening in London. And they claim that this is how you do an exit poll. But it's not the case. Riyadh, good morning. Will, Charlie, Alex, Kevin, Billy. Thank you for joining Backchannel. Raja's here as well. Have you met Kobe? Everybody's in the house. So we're just looking at, voting and voter suppression here in the US. In Georgia, where Biden is making this speech this morning, the Republican legislature enacted a law that restricts drop boxes, which were approved for widespread use in 2020 by the state's election board to address concerns over the pandemic. And they did it, the ratio of number of drop boxes versus number of votes was one drop box for every 100,000 votes, or voters. Well, it also restricts their location to only inside election offices or early voting sites, and their use only to early voting periods, and limits when a voter can request an absentee ballot to 67 days before the election, down from 6 months. Republican legislatures have also pushed for expanded use of photo identification during voting and better identity verification during the voter registration process. And, the reason that Democrats oppose this is because there are plenty of, immigrants who are entitled to vote who don't carry ID for these very reasons. Their point is everybody should get a vote. Anybody who's here should get a vote. I don't get a vote, unfortunately. I'm a non-citizen, so I don't get the chance to vote. But I'm prepared to. I'll just be a campaigner. I'll just be an activist instead. That's completely acceptable, apparently. Let's talk about Joe Biden and the good science, because Biden is calling on government agencies to strengthen their policies against inappropriate political influence when it comes to the science that guides decision-making, according to a new report. And I was very interested in this because the report was written by the administration's Interagency Scientific Integrity Task Force, and it found that instances of political influence are relatively infrequent in federal policymaking, but when they do occur, they tend to do the most damage in eroding the public's trust in government. And this is the view of my landlord. He just doesn't trust government at all. Well, doesn't trust a democratic government anyway. And he thinks that, there's this dark force, whether it is called the deep state or something. He thinks that there's this whole other conspiracy, which I know for a fact does not exist. It exists only in the mind of people that choose not to look and to investigate and to study and understand. It exists in the minds of people who are a little laissez-faire, let's say, about their government. They take no interest in it, and therefore they just make stuff up about it. So, where do you get your trusted information? Websites, magazines, word of mouth, even. Maybe there's channels that you watch or YouTube channels that you see and you don't trust. Do you double check your facts? I mean, look at Joe Rogan. He has the biggest podcast in the world, and yet the guy is a right-wing conspiracy theorist who just makes stuff up, and yet millions of people believe him. And he says he's not vaccinated because he doesn't think it's safe, and so have millions of people taking Joe Rogan's version of events rather than the CDC or the government, guidelines. Should we learn to trust government, and how have we become so distrusting of government over the years? Because it didn't happen overnight. This is not exclusive to the Biden administration. You can message me at backchannel.tv. You can also leave a review there and send us your thoughts on the show. and suggestions for upcoming segments. You can talk to your Echo device, just wake it up, then say, and then your message. And of course, there's YouTube, where we are streaming live right now. The task force used the report to point to examples of when scientific integrity policies were undermined during the Trump administration, including in the administration's response to the Hurricane Dorian map scandal and its push to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. They say although violations of scientific integrity are small in number compared to the magnitude of the federal government's scientific enterprise, they can have an outsized, detrimental impact on decision-making and public trust in science. I mean, look at Dr. Fauci this morning, who was giving evidence in Congress. And he basically had to accuse Rand Paul, a senator, Republican senator, of creating a conspiracy theory that Dr. Fauci was a bad person and was out to kill people with his announcements and predictions and advice. And yet it turned out that Rand Paul was just raising funds on his own website, on a Fire Fauci website that was on Rand Paul's own site, where it was like, donate money now. And Dr. Fauci, who's given his life to kind of the public good, literally had to humiliate Rand Paul publicly to try to get him to stop this rhetoric. I wonder if Rand Paul genuinely believes that Dr. Fauci is giving bad advice on purpose to kill people. Do you honestly think that Rand Paul thinks that? Or is he just knowing that he can make money, raise political funds through this rhetoric? And that's what worries me about all of the conspiracy theorists and all of the politicians that have got this, false version of events. Do they really believe it? Or do they know that it is a cash cow, that this is a way of making money? While the report warns against violations of scientific integrity, the task force's review, was not meant to investigate specific actions, such as the Sharpie extension of the hurricane. It was such a crazy day. There's a Sharpie on the president's desk. He uses famously a Sharpie to sign his autograph on bills and all sorts. And then there's the map of the hurricane's trajectory. And there's an extended circular line drawn to show that it's going to go into a state that he'd mentioned the day before, just so that he didn't look like an idiot, and then it suddenly wouldn't be because he misspoke. That was the administration we were dealing with before. I mean, that was considered normal. The work of the task force was not to do an investigation of prior administrations, said Dr. Alondra Nelson, who co-leads the force. She emphasized the looking forward nature of their work to mitigate potential violations in the future. I mean, how do people get so caught up in a theory where they've just lost all sense of normalcy? Because we have like an inbuilt sense of what is good and bad, and right and wrong. And I'll be like, that's a bad idea. It's just instinct. How is it that so many people, my landlord included, who doesn't believe in the mRNA vaccine, thinks it's dangerous and is microchipping you and is going to brainwash you and hasn't been researched enough and all this stuff that is simply not true? If you do the research, it is not true. And yet he is so convinced of that. He's convinced all his friends and all his family to have the same view. And it suits them. It suits them to have that view. Because there is this attitude, we know something that you don't. We have the information. That's their view. We've been tipped off. So trust me, we know, you take that vaccine, but we know that it's bad. That's his attitude. So this is what this report that Joe Biden's White House Office of Science and Technology's Policy Scientific Integrity Task Force is hoping to eradicate. which the Biden administration formally launched last spring, to review the federal government's scientific policies and whether they prevent improper political interference. Biden issued an executive memorandum within his first week in office, instructing the task force to examine the effectiveness of scientific integrity policies, and his administration has repeatedly emphasized bringing science back to the forefront of policymaking and restoring faith in government. Isn't it crazy that science is even considered in America something that might not be true? I can't think of anywhere else that I have knowledge of that would do that. That would be like, oh, well, science. I mean, that's a matter of opinion, isn't it, I'm not sure about that science thing. Because the thing that doesn't make sense to me is that these mRNA vaccines were created here. We have the best scientists in America than anywhere else in the world. We have the very best research. We have the best laboratories. We have the best brains here in America. So why, therefore, do we have an increasing percentage of people who are devaluing the great achievements of American science? If you look at the journal Science, it's published in America. If you look at the journal Nature, it's published in America. Andrew, thank you for joining us from Ohio. Alex is in California. Riyadh says, hello, Anthony. Hello, Riyadh. Will. Charlie. So many people joining us this morning for this conversation, this contradiction between inventing it's funny because Trump the other day was like trying to take credit for inventing the vaccines. And the assembled crowd at this event were not particularly happy about that, because they will only support what they are told to believe, And you've got one faction of his people saying, oh, vaccines are bad, and then he goes on stage and says, I'm triple vaxxed and vaccines are good, and people are like, oh, well, what am I supposed to believe? And that's my point about people needing to do the research themselves. Don't be a sheep. Don't be led. Do the research. Find the truth. Because if you just watch Fox, they're going to give you their version of events. They're going to tell you what they want you to think. None of that stuff is true. I watch it. I'm like, nah, that's not true. None of that's true. That's just political posturing. That's just propaganda. That's just partisan. None of it's true. And yet there are millions of people that buy into it and believe it. And this is why Dr. Fauci is getting death threats. This is why Dr. Fauci is enemy number one. This is why he had to take on Rand Paul this morning and say to him, you are the reason why I am getting death threats. They had to stop a guy who had an automatic weapon in his trunk, who was on his way to Washington to kill Fauci. This report also expands on scientific integrity principles outlined during the Obama administration by including new recommendations for agencies to periodically update and modernize their scientific integrity policies. It's very interesting. I was also interested how on the CDC website, if you go look at it now, that the first thing you see on the page, the COVID page about, vaccines and stuff, is debunking all of the Republican-led propaganda about vaccines and about coronavirus. So the CDC has had to start speaking the language of its critics to make people realize that drinking bleach is not going to cure you from coronavirus. It's probably just going to kill you. And shining a light through the body is not going to do anything. And that it's not just the flu. Very interesting, isn't it? There's this whole parallel universe of information that people exist in. Let's take a look at this wonderful America First stories, because I think it's so great. This is a US man becoming the first person in the world to get a pig transplant from a genetically modified pig. It was considered the last hope of saving Mr. Bennett's life, though it's not clear what his Or did I say pig transplant instead of heart transplant? Yeah, they put an entire pig inside his chest. When he goes to work, they'll say, "You really are bringing home the bacon." The transplant was considered the last hope of saving Mr. Bennett's life, though it's not clear what his long-term chances of survival will be. It was either do or die, or do the transplant, Mr. Bennett explained a day before the surgery. But I was just interested in this, because this is a first in the United States. I was interested in the most historic firsts from the US, across each and every state. And we could look at these together now if you fancy. Should we start with Iowa? Let's start with Iowa. An Iowa State University physics professor named John Vincent Astanasoff, along with his graduate assistant Clifford Berry, invented the world's first digital computer in the 1940s. They named it the Astanoff-Berry computer, or the ABC for short. The ABC, I remember the ABC computer. We had that at school. There was an ABC computer. I wonder if it had any connection to this. Must be. A Astanoff-Berry computer. Kansas had Susan Medora Salter. She was elected mayor of the city of Argonia in 1887, making her the first female mayor in the United States. She had to win the support of an all-male voter base. It would be more than 30 years before women could even cast a ballot. Isn't that crazy? That was Kansas. What about Kentucky, I hear you say, because we're on the K's at the moment. Mother's Day was first celebrated by Kentucky schoolteacher Mary Towle Sassine on April 20th, 1887, which was her mother's birthday. The holiday became increasingly popular over the years, and President Woodrow Wilson officially declared the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day in 1914. In Mississippi, this is great, isn't it? Both the world's first lung and heart transplants were performed in the state of Mississippi by Dr. James D. Hardy, a surgeon at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He completed the world's first human lung transplant in 1963. A year later, performed the first heart transplant surgery in the world. You see, this is, again, it's just why I don't understand why there's so many critics of science in America, when America is science. And if you are truly patriotic, then you will respect the science, you will get vaccinated, you will take responsibility for your place in society, because we are living in a modern scientific universe. And if you take drugs, blood pressure reducing drugs, or statins for cholesterol reduction, or something, for, I don't know, maybe you take some calcium even for your bones, all of this stuff is born from science. Everything is born from science. Everything that we surround ourselves is born from science. So why would you deny science to be true in the case of a modern vaccine? Messenger RNA has been worked on for nearly 30 years as a concept. It's not new. And, 7 billion people have been vaccinated now with no serious side effects. And still people are like, nah, I'm not sure about that thing. Missouri in 1904 hosted the first Olympics held in the United States, but because many European nations complained about the cost and time required to travel to the state's capital, only 12 other countries participated. The United States ended up taking home 239 medals, the most ever won in a single Olympics. That's so funny. That was in Missouri. And finally, Montana. For a seasoned traveler, few things are more reliable than finding that small Gideon Bible inside every hotel room's bedside drawer. The practice is said to have originated in Montana when two traveling salesmen met in a hotel room and began distributing Bibles to hotels around the United States. It's their fault, basically. It's their fault. So that's a nice positive thing to end on, isn't it? That kind of concept that actually, we are living in a city or a country that is full of great minds, inventions, whether it be an early computer or whether it be the invention and creation of Mother's Day. These things had to happen somewhere. These are historic. And they also just stuck a pig's heart in a human man. And 3 days later, he's still alive. What will they think of next? Thank you for joining me. I'm Anthony Davis. This was The Anthony Davis Show. Thank you for joining Backchannel. Stay with us for your pal Hal. He's on the way next. Have yourself a really nice Tuesday. Bye for now.